What's up? Welcome to a new episode of Schmovie. This is episode number 360. My name is Steve, one of the co-hosts. As always, joined by
Ron
and John.
Fellas, how you guys doing today?
Good. Really
good.
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 Yeah.
Good.
Yeah.
Good.
That too. So today's episode is going to be a fun one, I think. Like on our thread, this text thread that we keep going in between recording days, like Ronald made a comment about trying to do. It started off as a conversation about like year-end stuff in general, just like best of, favorites, top lists, whatnot, and it kind of molded or changed a little bit into this idea of talking instead of just doing like favorite TV shows. We've talked about a lot of these things on the podcast before, and even some of the stuff we'll mention today, I'm sure will come up. But like to try to frame it around the idea of the streaming services, because we talk a lot about the state of streaming, what's available where, the quality on certain streaming platforms versus others. So it kind of changing this idea of kind of doing a state of the union type thing, or a state of the streaming wars, whatever we end up calling this. But the idea was to kind of look across the major streaming platforms and kind of break it down into each of us picking our favorite show from each. So there's tons of streamers out there right now. So to try to like kind of keep it clean, keep it simple, we basically started discussing, talking about Netflix, Amazon Prime, Disney Plus, HBO Max, and then an everything else category. Everything else basically being any streaming platform that has less than 50 million subscribers, as of the most recently reported numbers. And things like Hulu, which is owned by Disney, falls into the everything else category only because it is a separate service. They haven't merged yet. But yeah, so like we can kind of pick anything that's available on a streaming service for that last category. But otherwise, when we get to this part of the show, we're going to kind of just go through and pick our favorite show of the year. Probably we could say safely of the year, since we're so close towards the end. There's nothing like major dropping soon, but I think it'll be an interesting conversation, and we'll be able to kind of talk about the services in general when we kind of get a picture of what each of us pick for each one as we kind of go down the list. But
it's been a while since we've done like a review episode. I mean, we used to do
right
2 or 3 of these at the end of the year, beginning of the year, and we will be having our movies. We'll return to that tradition. We'll do the best movies of 2022 coming up soon. This is kind of a different angle on that, like you said, Steve. This is the Schmovie part of our diet, all that streaming stuff. But I also think this is kind of interesting because I think it has been a while, even within this year. We've talked about a lot of things like in the final moments of an episode that maybe one of us was watching that the others hadn't yet. And so we've maybe had little conversations about shows that we haven't had a chance to sit back and say, yes, this whole season was good, or yes, this has sat in my mind. So even if we've talked about some of these before, I think it's good for listeners who may have recently hopped on, or listeners who haven't caught every episode, to maybe, circle this episode as a kind of appointment episode, because this is a little bit of a previously on Movie Schmovie, you know what I mean?
Right.
Which again, if you're new to the show, this is something we used to do every year, quite a few of these. And I think what happened was when the COVID era hit, it was just so disparate and hard to say what we were doing and what we were watching. Years didn't mean anything anymore. And I think we finally are back to the point where I can look back and feel like I know what the last year in movies was like. It doesn't feel like a big blur to me. So yeah, this will be a fun one. But we also have a movie that's not from this year, or a show from this year to talk about that Ronald has required us to watch.
Yes.
So before we get into that streaming stuff, let's do this. Let's talk about Truck Turner. Ronald, I just want to tell you one thing. I don't know what Truck Turner is, but there's one thing I know he's not. He ain't a poot butt.
He is. I love
who's going to say that?
I love that they said that at the table. It's like,
Did they fight to see who had to deliver that line, or did they fight to see who didn't have to deliver that line?
Man, it's funny. My grandma used to say poop butt a lot. Like, it was like a terrible, the guy's a poop butt. He's like a terrible, flimsy dude. He's like, he's not reliable. He's a poop butt. My
You know
grandma
what it
used to
feels like? It feels like a cleaned up version of shit ass, which is
say.
like I got called that all the time. That's what my family was busy saying.
Yeah, man. This is
They didn't clean it up for you, John. They
No,
just
they
went
did not.
straight in.
It was, you're right. It was just for me. Everyone else was a poot butt. But with me, it was
Yeah, man.
goddamn shit ass John Walker. Please come to dinner.
Yeah, man. So it's 1974's Truck Turner. Original script written by Lee Chapman, who originally wrote this as a white bounty hunter, and then I guess there was a point where they're like, man, let's open this up to Isaac Hayes and let him do the acting and the soundtrack, and just improv. There's a lot.
I was
There's a
wondering
lot
how
of
much of
this.
that was improv and how much of that, because we will talk about this, I'm sure, but there's a lot of like joshing around in
Yes.
this movie
Yes.
that felt like it's a little written and scripted to me to feel improv, but it felt
Yeah.
like, I don't know, there's a lot of sort of amateurish acting that has a lot of charm, you know, that's like,
Yeah.
there's chemistry, but it's awkward, sort of amateurish chemistry. There's an interesting thing going on in this movie with those. Because
Yeah.
Isaac Hayes, I mean, let's say this. I don't know how many movies he did before this, but this feels like it's a bit of an attempt to kind of take what he did for Shaft, which was make this soundtrack. And a few years later, here he is doing the soundtrack and playing a guy who very much feels like a Shaft ripoff. Like even the opening lyrics to the thing are about like, who is this guy, you know?
Yeah.
And it's about you know, different character, but it's a similar concept. Here's a guy who's going to get all the ladies and kick all the ass.
Yeah.
And he's going to have a very stiff denim duster on, and he's going to rock it. And that's going to be the Isaac Hayes of it. But, you know, this was like an attempt, right, to turn him into like a blaxploitation star.
Yeah, it seems like it, man. It had the formula, you know, the soundtrack was so strong. He was such a badass, and you know, one thing a movie needs, especially a good blaxploitation movie needs, is a good villain. And god damn it, when you think there's one villain, another one pops up, and then another one pops up. It's the gift that keeps on giving. And Yaphet Kotto and Nichelle Nichols are like gold in this movie. I mean, especially Nichelle, like, who's just going for it. Like, I don't know.
They're seen together. There's one scene late in the movie where they're like fighting about what's going on.
Mhm.
And I would say that was my favorite scene in the movie, just because it's like, it's all she's turning it up to 11
She
and
is.
doing this character, but it's like, she feels like she knows she's in a blaxploitation movie. I don't know if in 74 people had the context of like the type of acting that was going to feel kind of, you know, it set the tone for action movies of the 80s, like mainstream movies, you know, this kind of over the top world. But like that scene really is like the most absurd and the most like fired up that the acting gets. And those two performers opposite each other are doing something. He's great in this. He's got this understated quality.
He does.
But I thought Harvard Blue was a pretty solid villain.
yeah, man.
He's great.
And the ancillary characters, like the white pimp that just shows up at the. By the way,
with the eye patch that matches his whatever's going on with his shirt.
He's
always got like a Western style shirt on, and like whatever the other fabric is on the shirt that matches the eye patch.
Everything about this movie was so funny. Like putting cocaine on a dead pimp at his funeral. It's just like little touches that just made this thing. And the view, I like from the casket view of the cocaine being kind of sprinkled on by each pimp.
Yeah. And the spit. When Harvard Blue spits on him, you see the spit hit the camera too.
Like, okay, so he's a bad guy, right? Like at this point, like when he got, I'm like, this is starting off hot. Everybody's pulling on cocaine. Oh, I'm so sad. And then he just goes like a loogie into this guy,
and then walks away, gets back in his car, and drives away.
He made time to just do that.
But then, like a couple scenes later, he's at the meeting at Dorinda's place, Nichelle Nichols' house, to like decide how to avenge Gator. So it's almost like, oh, this is just, it's all in the family. Even though he just spit on Gator, they have their own thing going on.
Yeah.
But I thought that stuff was fun. Talking about the ancillary characters and the kind of funny things this movie does, I don't want to forget, there's one touch at the beginning of this movie, like lots of city scenes, like some pretty believable drunken brawling outside a bar, where people are half laughing and half falling on each other and stuff. But there's one moment where it's like, let's show you just how bad things are in the city, folks. I'm gonna tell you something. You will believe there's a man with a cat on a leash that is eating rice out of a box or something, and he's got booze in his pocket. That little reveal was one of my favorite little things. I was just like, man, I'm in for something here. What is this? Okay, sad guy with a cat on a leash, and then it panned in on the bottle sticking out of his pocket, and it's like, man, we are on these things are tough.
There's a lot of cats in this movie. Can we say that too?
Yeah, it's cat heavy. It's cat heavy.
Cat heavy. And there's like this whole
and they say the word pussy a lot.
They do. They say it quite a bit.
Yeah.
And the thing about it is, like, even when Truck is kind of weird to the cat, like, he just kind of like, get the fuck out of it.
He calls it a fuck ass son of a bitch. Because it pisses on the shirt that he's wearing.
Yeah.
And he wears it out.
He wears it out.
And his friend tells him he's gross.
Yeah, yeah.
His friend just flat to his face says, my lady doesn't like you because she's a nice middle-class lady and you're gross.
Yeah, so and there's a lot of like emotional stakes. You know, when the characters die, they die. It really means something. You know, like Truck is on a mission after a sudden death of one of the characters, and it's just a lot of chaos. Like it just feels so like eye for an eye. And then it, I mean, I'm just skip ahead a little bit. Nichelle Nichols, every scene she was incredible. Because at first you're like, is she just like a random prostitute? Because you know when he first meets up, when he's trying to meet the pimp, when he's first trying to meet her.
Yeah,
boss,
you could believe that was a one scene role where she's just got like a cameo star power kind of one scene role, and then she turns out to be a lot more important. Right.
It's cool how they buried the lead in that way. Like I was not thinking that her boss would die. Like I was not thinking that was going to happen. And then when she kind of emerges, she's like, "Oh, I have to be." By the way, I think she improv'd every insult in that room. Like it got to a point where it's like, "Are you just saying this to be mean spirited?" Like, shut up, you white whore. You just shut the. It's like
shut up, you junkie whore.
You junkie whore. you bitches better be selling some pussy. I'm like, whoa, the show. She went crazy, and I thought it was special, man. Like it felt like. And okay, one thing I also want to say is shout out to the people that watched the trailer on YouTube and TikTok. I had like real engagement on TikTok. There were 2 people that actually said they saw it in the theater and said that back in 74 and said that the audience reaction was insane. Thank you so much for the feedback, guys, on TikTok and YouTube. So like it's cool that we're having this like engagement. We put the trailer up and then people are like in real time reacting. Oh shit, I remember this movie.
I think that's how it works when it works, right?
Yeah, when it works, right? When it
got a little taste of it there, Ron.
Yeah, it's really
so
cool.
Guys, you were talking about some of the great insults. If people are online, maybe we can create some hashtags out of some of these insults. I don't know if maybe you can help me with even what does it mean? Take the grease out your ass, man.
I don't know what that meant, man.
Okay, there's another one too. He's like a bulldog with eyes up his ass. How does that help?
That means he always sees it coming.
No, I'm wondering, like the shit coming. I guess he sees the
shit. No. He's a bulldog
shit
with eyes on his ass. He's fierce from both ends.
But he's got eyes up his ass. He's got eyes up his ass.
I mean, let's just say he sees anything incoming. I don't know.
Right. I mean, it's like it doesn't. Also, are those his only eyes, or does he have eyes in the front too?
That's a good question.
He's got extra eyes that are up his ass. It helps him, though. That's one thing we know. No poot butt, and he's a bulldog with eyes up his ass. No, I think that you might be right about the ad-libbing, because I was trying to think, like, is some of this slang just slang that doesn't work for me? Or is this people that are kind of good and kind of not good? Like I said, kind of charming in its way, but like even the line, there's, not to be gross, but there's a line where he's talking about how much he and his lady are going to have sex when she gets out of prison. And he says, you're going to be deep walking through that, or was it deep walking or deep? I think that's what he said, is deep walking through that. And then he said all the way to the bowl. What does that mean? I wanted to look up all the way to the bowl. What does that mean in 70s slang?
I don't know what that means. All the way to the bowl.
Yeah, I mean, but it's very sexual and very odd and very much
Yeah.
like these like you said. I mean, to get back to what you were saying about Nichelle Nichols, some of those, that scene, the back and forth, it's just crazy, and everyone in the room's like laughing and reacting and stuff. It feels like the people are on set are kind of having the fun that you're seeing in the movie, or at least it feels like it's that atmosphere.
She starts insulting Truck after passing the threshold of the building. It's like it's so tense between those two characters. When he comes to check to see where her boss is before he gets killed, like you're like, woo! And then she just firing insults at him immediately. I was like, what is this? I just enjoyed it so much, man. Like,
yeah, I would say like the biggest thing. I mean, I had never heard of the movie before you mentioned it, to be honest. But for again, something I'm always thinking about, like especially in today's movie landscape, about like overlong movies and just like so much could be cut and things like that. You know, these last few movies that we've watched, this one included, I just feel like it feels propulsive when you're watching it. You know, like the things you're describing, Ronald, like when they walk into a room, like it wastes no time like for something to happen.
It's frenetic almost.
Yeah, and it's just like, okay, well, I don't have a moment to like get bored watching this movie, basically, because it's very well, like, I guess, I don't know, well paced, but it's just like there's so much going on. And even some of the things you mentioned, like the idea of kind of the bait and switch of who the real villain is. And you know, the stuff going on with his girlfriend and, you know, the other pimps. And it's just, there's so much going on around the one mission that I just feel like that's a big, I like that about it a lot. It's just the fact that, like, I don't know, you just don't have a moment to like lose interest in terms of how crazy these characters are being or how wild the dialogue is. It's just like, it just keeps trucking along.
Oh, yeah, Steve, I'm glad you mentioned the kind of crazy pace, because I made a note of the frantic quality of some of those scenes. Like there's a scene where they rough up a guy who's like going through the trash in the alley looking for stuff.
Yeah.
It's not clear whether he's like homeless or whatever's going on with him, but he's just, you know, in the alley, and they basically just rough him up and threaten him until he gives them information. And it's like they give him money, but it's implied they're going to kick his ass. And there's that guy who does seem to work for Harvard Blue, who they go to his apartment, and then one of them grabs his arm and the other one grabs his leg, and they like shake him around and then like hang him out the window. And then he gets what they want out of him, and then he kicks him through the phone booth. And right after that, there's a scene, he kicks him through a phone booth, and the guy goes through the glass. He's walking down the street, and he tells a guy to call the cops. Well, the guy he tells that to happens to be a guy who's like delivering a water cooler bottle, whatever you call those giant bottles, and he gets scared of Truck Turner and runs and throws down the bottle. So there's like literally glass breaking in a phone booth, and like the next moment is a guy dropping a water bottle. So it's like, I don't know, there's just some of that kind of crazy chaos, but also when they go into a bar and get ambushed later, it's got that instant quality you're talking about, Steve, of like there's no dialogue or pacing once they're in there. It's just crazy. And it does feel a little bit like the people on set were maybe making improvisational choices, but also like maybe the formula that they knew they were working with. I mean, it's kind of like, again, it's like when someone made an action movie in the 80s.
Totally.
You know how to introduce this guy, get him on the case, give him a friend who maybe doesn't make it to the end of the movie, give him a significant other of some form with the story going on there. There's a lot of like what is part of this template that kind of works because they're zipping along, like you're saying, Steve, and because it is funny, even if it's funny sometimes in a what the fuck sort of way. I just wonder if at the time they were making this, they thought people talk this way. Or if at the time they were making this, they were like, we're being crazy and this movie's off the chain. But, you know, who knows? But maybe there was a lot of cocaine going around. Maybe they didn't dump it all on the corpses.
I can't say enough about Nichelle and Yaphet Kotto, man. Also, let's talk about three shootings that I think were top shootings I've ever seen in a movie. One is that random guy in the parking lot that wants to that kind of gets the okay to kill Truck Turner. I guess is there like some money's on his head? Is what
I think in that meeting with everybody, basically you then see the crews. I think it's the guy who says poot butt is the guy you're talking about. Okay. The guy who attacks him in the parking lot is the one who said Truck Turner ain't. It's not like he's a poot butt.
Yeah, he kind of dies in this like ballerina-esque sort of like one foot up, very graceful death. And then Harvard Blue's death was like
Upsetting.
yeah, it was like visceral, man. Like it did that like thing where you follow somebody for like it's that thing that you do when you panic, when you like run out of breath or something like that, where you just
When you think you are okay, like it's like the
yeah,
guy on the
yeah,
battlefield who doesn't know his guts are hanging out
yes,
and is saying,
yes,
guys, you got to get me out of here, and everybody's looking at him going, you're done. And
yeah,
like even Truck doesn't, like, he could open fire on this guy, and it feels like the kind of movie where he might just shoot him until he's
yeah,
dead, but he's watching him. Instead, he hangs back and watches him die. And then you're right, every time we cut to Yaphet Kotto in that, it's a close-up of his face, and he's like, his eyes are glassy. I mean, the acting job he's doing is amazing, because it upset me. It made me think
yeah.
like, oh, I wouldn't want to die. Like, I'm not even wishing that on Harvard Blue. And he's not a guy, he's not, he killed a cat. I mean, frankly,
He killed a cat.
I'm not here for this guy. But no, you're right. That moment, the shooting was interesting because he gets shot in the back twice as he's walking away. And then there's
Yeah,
just a moment where Truck stops shooting him and kind of watches him stagger to his feet. And we hang out with him for a long time while he tries to get up and tries to get away. So it's kind of like the movie's really saying, like, when a movie does that, like really hangs around and watches somebody like kind of die foolishly like that,
yeah,
it's basically saying like, this person's terrible and they
yeah,
kind of
yeah,
deserve to go out in this awful way. But it really did feel like, wow, after all these people we see get shot and like just fall off a building or whatever,
yeah,
here's a really, like you said, visceral death where I felt like I was looking at a person's eyes when the light went out of them.
yeah.
Yeah.
That was weird. It
Yeah,
felt so strange.
powerful.
Yeah, and I'm glad they did it. Yeah, that's just stuck with me.
Okay, if you made this movie today and you were
Mhm.
trying to come up with like a cool blaxploitation hero, I don't think you would have him entrap his girlfriend so that the cops arrest her and take her away for a month. That was
Yeah, I was gonna
harsh
ask
and
about that.
crazy.
Yeah.
I feel like that felt like a clever thing at the screenwriting stage and kind of funny thing, but especially in the context of what we know now about cops and police violence and calling the cops, that seemed like he was sitting there kind of going, he,
Yes, not even that far
that
from her.
moment felt too crazy for me, but also it just felt like this movie doesn't quite have its heart right when it comes to the cop stuff yet. You know what I mean? Like the best blaxploitation movies that I've seen, there's you don't use the cops to entrap your girlfriend. Like, you know
Yeah,
what I mean?
yeah.
Like the cops are to be avoided. But I did think that was an interesting moment.
I love that. I also loved when he first caught the first dude, he is like saying every racist thing that is in his head. And he's like,
Yeah.
you won't just fight me. He's like, okay, cool. And they
Yeah.
just fist fight on the side of the road in a field.
Yeah.
What?
His friend's getting bored. He's like, come on, haven't you
Like,
beat
come
him
on.
enough?
Yeah. God, man. This movie is so fucking funny. Oh man. So so you guys thought it was okay then?
Oh no, I mean
That's
it's
cool.
super fun. I mean,
Yeah,
I feel like
fun. Yeah.
I feel like this is in that I feel like
Hmm.
kind of we're on a tear with these required viewings. It's fun
Oh
thus
man, this
far.
has been fun.
At this point, even if we get one that's not good, but if it's not good in an interesting way, I'll be glad we all watched it together. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? But this was fun because you're right, Ronald. You said you're going to make us watch a blaxploitation film, and my first thought was, oh, let us. It's like, I love those. I've seen many,
Oh
but I
yeah,
realized we
yeah.
haven't really focused on them on the show too much. And I wonder if it's because culturally it's kind of hard to figure out how to frame them, because a lot
Yeah.
of what you're laughing at is stuff that hasn't aged well. And yet what's happening culturally with these movies, I don't know, it's just an interesting snapshot. And I think the fact that this movie started out as it's weird to think that someone would be writing a script and thinking this is a white bounty hunter story, but I understand what in 1974 what it meant to say we're going to make this a blaxploitation movie. I mean, they
Yeah.
knew what that meant. And again, like I
Yeah.
said, there were a lot of like boxes to tick that they ticked in this
Yeah.
to make this that kind of movie. But I do think it might be that some of that stuff, like maybe the stuff with the cops, maybe that stuff was a hangover from when this was not intended for a black character.
Yeah, for
Because
sure.
it seems like maybe that would have played differently if it wasn't like a person potentially getting their girlfriend gunned down by the police.
Yeah. I mean, he laughed at her not even like 20 feet away from her. He's just like,
Yep. I
oh
took care of
no. But anyway, yeah, man. I'm glad you guys enjoyed it.
No, that was fun.
Yeah, thanks, man. I'm glad you guys enjoyed it.
So what's
So
next? What's our next required viewing, Steve?
Well, yeah, I don't know if this is going to end up going well or not, but I'm only doing it because it's timely and I need to do this because I saw it one time in theaters and it was, a phenomenon and became the largest, highest grossing movie of all
No,
time. And its sequel finally comes out next week. So I think we should rewatch Avatar.
Yeah.
And honestly,
that's a
like and this is a weird thing too. Like my daughter, one of her learning apps, it's weird on her iPad. There's some like other app that they have, which is like a game. I can't remember what it's called. It's a game, but like one of the ads, like on this level that she's having trouble getting past, is like nonstop Avatar Way of Water, and she is so interested in it. And I'm just like, I don't remember a lot about Avatar. I remember bullet points and my feelings in general. And yeah, I think it was an awesome cinematic experience seeing it when we saw it. But I definitely need to rewatch it and like see if it's something I can watch with her because I don't really remember. Like I feel like language probably is the problem and maybe some violence, but like I just talking about it a lot recently. I'm just like I don't know when I'm going to rewatch Avatar, and I'm just like, hey, now I have a section on my podcast with my buddies where we have to
Yep.
watch something. So I mean, I'm sorry, maybe if either of you are not fans of it,
a
but
good pick, man.
I feel like it has the opportunity to be a huge movie. So having not been able to see it before it comes out, the sequel, I mean, it'll be cool for us to rewatch it, kind of be fresh with it, and in the weeks that end the year, be able to check out and talk about the new one here on the podcast. Shortly after rewatching it.
Cool.
So we are probably going to have one of our regular weekly episodes next week, and then we might be maybe going because I go out of town, so it might be that then when we come back after that, it will be our like looking
Yeah.
back at the year, or maybe
Mm.
we'll spend some time talking about Avatar 2 before we get into our best of the year or something like that. But no,
Okay.
I like that idea, Steve, because I've been very curious about the hype for the new one. I mean, right now the hype, the press screenings that have happened,
Yeah.
people are talking about the things you expect people to be raving about on a James Cameron movie, which is the effects. Like there's a lot of people saying, oh, it's amazing, it's mind-blowing, much better than the first. And if you scratch a little beneath the surface, you'll see a lot of people saying some of the same things I would have said about the first one, which is
Right. Right.
the spectacle is almost enough to make you ignore the thin characterizations or cheesy dialogue or whatever. It's got all the strengths and weaknesses of a James Cameron thing. The advantage of having all the strengths of a James Cameron thing is that last hour is probably going to be an amazing, as you said, Steve, cinematic experience. So I'm not looking forward to 3 hours plus of Avatar 2 The Way of Water, or just Avatar The Way of Water, but I
Yeah.
am
Crazy.
I'm extremely interested to see that aspect of just, okay, this is the new latest greatest attempt to give us this giant immersive experience. Even if I'm not crazy about the imagery, I think I can appreciate the detail and the like I did with Avatar, where
Sure.
not so much the originality of it, because a lot of it felt kind of warmed over from other things, but just the newness of what it was trying to do and how fully imagined the world was.
Right.
I'm excited by this idea that we're going to go into the ocean and just see a bunch of cool creatures, and it's going to look interesting on a big screen. I don't know if I feel like 3 hours, it'll be interesting to see if the story's there. But no, good choice.
We'll see. We'll see.
Yeah.
All right. So just so as a reminder for anybody that didn't watch Truck Turner, I know I watched it on Pluto TV. If,
I did
if
too.
anybody has that, so that's one of the fast services, free ad supported streaming television.
Saw a lot of ads for Yellowstone,
Yeah.
the spinoff.
Yeah.
And you'll see that for those because their like parent company is Viacom. So
Yeah.
but yeah, Pluto is a cool service. It's one of those
Right.
fast services, and Freevee, which Amazon owns, is another one if you want to check them out. They have a lot of just all over the place library titles that they're really kind of building up and transitioning into our streaming talk. Like the fast services like Pluto and like Freevee, like there's some of the more profitable streamers that are out there right now because of the way they've been able to use ads. But yeah, it's on Pluto if you want to check out Truck Turner, just to wrap that up. But yeah, okay, let's transition into this this list idea. So I guess we'll just kind of go through each network and or each streamer rather, streamer/network, whatever you want to call it. And just kind of go through our picks and just a brief reason, and we can have a discussion overall at the end of it, I guess, with the state of everything. Once we kind of know where we each fall with each service. So Let's just go top down. So let's start with Netflix. If you guys don't mind, I'll just put mine out there real quick. Stranger Things season 4 was my pick of the year. It's one of my favorite shows of all time. Beyond just this year, beyond Netflix. Knowing that there's only one season left, I really think that they've done a pretty good job of setting up like what a final season could look like with the penultimate season, and new characters are being introduced. You know, they have the cultural moment with like a crazy awesome 80s song that catches on. Like there's just they were it was interesting to see what Netflix was able to do with kind of breaking it into two parts to try to kind of on the surface, you know, draw things out and kind of be able to have people watch it in two different quarters for the year for like their earnings reports. But I think in some ways it did, and we talked about this earlier. It gave people an opportunity to really kind of like catch up on the majority of the season and experience the last two episodes as close to together as we could, you know, with what
Yeah.
you see Netflix doing, which I thought was a success from my experience. And in general, I just love the season. But yeah, Stranger Things season 4 is my pick.
Yeah, I mean, I'll piggyback on that and say you kind of took that from me. So
Okay.
I'll name another show that I thought was really strong on Netflix this year, but I kind of think what you're saying about Stranger Things, I just want to say, like, I think what you're right about there is that if there was a perception that people had sort of cooled on the show, if season
Right.
3 wasn't everybody's favorite, if like season 1 was like going into season 2, and some people might say season 2 was even better, you know.
Sure.
Season 3 you didn't hear as much of that about, but you heard other people who thought it was great, and this was my favorite thing. But it was becoming a little bit more divisive, and I feel like at the end of Stranger Things season 4 there was a little bit more back on the same page. People I knew that had watched the show and fallen off had gotten back in. People I knew
Sure.
that were never fans of the show had said this was a pretty good season. It seems like people are excited, and maybe it's some of that energy showrunners get when they know they're closing in on an ending that they have in mind.
Sure.
There's a little bit of confidence. There's a little bit of talk now about how many characters they left alive at the end of the season, but I really think that's so that they can break our hearts as
I think so.
every episode next time. But so since that got taken, I'll just throw out there a show that I you know, that show was far and away my favorite. Stranger Things was. I don't know if it was a weird year for Netflix. That there was nothing that just knocked my socks off outside of that. But I had a lot of these flawed shows that I really liked and I wanted to put forth, but I was like, well, I don't know if I really want to recommend that or if I want to say this was the best thing. So of those shows, I'm going to say Sandman was the show that I don't think we talked about on this podcast at all, but I was sick. There was one point I had a very mysterious ailment for like 2 weeks. It turned out not to be COVID, but it was something really bad, stomach thing over the summer. And I just sat down and kind of had one of those days where I could just veg out
Yeah.
and watch. And I let myself really kind of get into it and get past the awkward setup mythology moments what it was trying to do. And then by the time it got to the end of the season, I really appreciated how it was able to sort of combine an anthology aspect with a long running storyline. It kind of felt like it was nailing something about the Sandman comics, which admittedly I was never a huge fan of. Not that I didn't like them, but just that I didn't read that many of them. But what I had read, I knew that it was a thorny concept to try to turn into a movie or even to turn into a show if you weren't going to do it right. And I think what they did that was so smart was they bit off a relatively small piece of this giant mythology rather than trying to tell like the greatest Sandman story ever in a season. They kind of started at the beginning and pulled from stories that you need to set things up. If they get their season 2 and they can progress with it, I think the confidence of that season might be something really amazing. But that first season of Sandman really does set up a unique mythology that's creepy and sort of sci-fi superhero, but also sort of horror fantasy. Neil Gaiman is a guy who has had a lot of books and comics that people love, but hasn't been adapted that much, or at least not in things that feel like they hold on to the full qualities of what his writing and comics can be. So yeah, right. I thought it was an interesting show and has 2 or 3 episodes that really do stand out. The episodes that feel a little bit more like their anthology episodes are often the ones that really stand out. But by the time it got to the end of the season, they had established this kind of weird, chilly character in this weird world. And you know, I don't know how many people, I don't know what the numbers were like for this show, but my impression was the reaction was strong enough for Netflix to maybe keep it going another round. So Sandman.
Cool. I'm gonna piggyback on Steve's pick, Stranger Things season 4. I think this is what happens when you give um, a production team space to let an art go, to let it flesh out and see it through. I mean, a network would have let go of Stranger Things after the third season. Not because it was bad, but because it didn't do as well as the first two. It's like almost competing with itself. But the fact that they let them do, the third and let them play it out the way they wanted to play it out, and then the fourth, we wouldn't have appreciated the fourth had the third not done the building that it did. It really paid off the relationships that were established in the third season and stuff like that. So it's almost like this. It's the season 2 of The Wire. That's the Stranger Things season 3. I mean, because it doesn't mean it's bad. It just means it's not as good as the other seasons, which is so weird that it's competing with itself in that way.
That's my favorite season, I think. But
it's a good season, man. It's a real good season. Like, especially
what I love about season 2 of The Wire is that scene where our guy is going down to the docks to meet with the Greek. And they've gotten the news about everything that's going on behind the scenes, and he doesn't even know he's walking up to the guys that are about to kill him, and he turns to him right before he gets there and says, "Your way, it won't work." And then the other guy he's saying that to is the guy who wanted to work with, and I can't remember the guy's name, Frank Sabatnik or something like that.
Yeah.
A Sabatka, whatever it is, the union guy. That's one of the. It's just a chilling moment that I feel like I don't know if I got a moment. Well, The Wire always had chilling moments, but that's a conversation for a different day. Let's remember to talk about The Wire sometime. I don't think no one's talked about that, right? How good that show is.
No, nobody at all. But yeah, it's their season 2, and that doesn't mean that it's bad. It just means that it's competing against itself in a weird way, and it just rewarded everybody for kind of their allegiance, especially if you started from the beginning. You know what I mean? Like, there's something hit us really hard that the people that kind of stuck it out, like I kind of expressed to Steve how disappointed I was in the third, and you, John, I told you too, just how weird I felt about it. It just didn't feel quite as Stranger Things-y as it was. And it's almost like they took that information. They're like, cool, we did this work in third. And they listened in a way. It's weird.
Well, you got to acknowledge they also had time to do that because of COVID. But
again, like, Netflix giving them the space to do that is crazy. And the fact that this fourth season was a bigger cultural phenomenon than I ever have seen. My wife's niece was quoting things from the show that she'd never seen before. People are taking it for the uninitiated. People take things in through TikTok with no context. So there's all these compilations of things like vital lines, storylines that people really like that they know nothing about except the lines. And Aaron's niece was just like quoting this show like the back of her hand, but didn't know any of the stories.
Well, I mean, so Eddie was a huge breakout character.
Oh, Eddie was incredible.
You already mentioned the Kate Bush moment. Kate Bush of, as we say, of it all. I think that there is a. You're right that it managed to connect with the broader conversation in a way that wasn't just like better than what season 3 did. It was like a monumental.
It's huge.
It felt huge. It felt like. Definitely the whole COVID thing, the time away, the year or so that we would have gotten a season, but we didn't. It created that anticipation. And of course, there were a lot of jokes as well, memes about the kids being like 30 or whatever. But I feel like people forget how much people really do change between like 14 and 16 and 17. So I think that the show has plausible deniability right now. I think coming back and picking up right where they left off at the end of this season is going to be a problem if that's what they're doing, because those kids are starting to look, a little different. But that's about it. Otherwise, I think it's amazing, this cast, this group of characters, how much we care about them. Murray, come on, has become like such a great character, a guy who felt like he was a character that they invented so they could kill him, has turned out to be like one of the most heroic forces on the show. So no, I think that, you're right, Ronald. It's a sign of creators who've been given a chance to do the story they want to do, and a creative team that clearly is invested
Yeah,
in making this world feel real to us,
for sure, for sure. Cool. So what's the next streaming
So
service?
let's go down the list. Right on the heels, allegedly, of Netflix, possibly surpassing them sooner than later,
Allegedly.
is Amazon Prime. They have a call, I think, this week or next, where they're going to kind of get a little more into the numbers that they claim, but they may actually be past Netflix in subscribers, but it's a question of
Right.
who's actually watching Amazon Prime Video
Yeah,
than
yeah.
just being an Amazon Prime subscriber. But numbers wise, they're right there. But yeah, my pick for Amazon Prime would be The Boys season 3. um, I admittedly I don't really watch a lot of Amazon Prime. There's only really, like, I'd say consistently been maybe 5 or 6 shows that I've like
Mm.
really kind of loved on the platform. And some of them, I think one of them got canceled, or maybe is getting one extra season and then it's kind of wrapping up. But like, a lot of comedies that I enjoy. But I mean, this one is, in terms of the scope of the show and like not being familiar with the source material of the show, in the first couple seasons. And honestly, kind of going into season 3, I had completely slept on season 2. Like, I didn't watch season 2, like at the start of the whole COVID times. I remember like my coworkers like just raving to me about it and like, how have you not watched the second season knowing how much I like the first? I don't know why. Like, it just fell off the radar. We talk about it all the time. It's just like there's so much opportunity to watch anything that it's something that I only watch. So the time I watch stuff with Aaron, my wife, like, she didn't want to watch that. So it's like I'm watching it when I have my own time to watch something. But I think I benefited from being able to kind of binge season 2 into season 3 and even catching up to a point because of the access that we had to screeners and such. But yeah, I just thought the third season just kind of continues to do what the show does so well. Just great characters, great villains. The most interesting character on the show is the villain, arguably. Love Homelander. You know, the actor who was it, Anthony Starr. Like, I don't know what else he's doing. Or outside of The Boys, but I would love to see him in more stuff, because I think he's just phenomenal on the show.
Sadly,
And
Steve, he's going to be playing characters that feel like a reaction or a compliment to this character, probably for the foreseeable future. You know what I mean? Like, this is so indelible and so much like his look. He's got this
True.
otherworldly kind of quality. I wonder, it's the James Gandolfini concept of like, is it going to be hard to get this character out of your head when you see this guy? If he's playing like a suburban dad, am I going to be thinking like, man, Homelander's got him fooled, or is he going to be believable?
But yeah, I don't know. He's
but
great.
No, he's great. Yeah, and I had the same journey you did with season 2 going into season 3, and I think we talked about it on this show. Just for me, realizing not just that show is for me, after thinking maybe it wasn't quite my jam, but then thinking like it's some of the smartest, commentary on superhero stuff, smartest meta, whatever you want to call about that at a time when we culturally are getting kind of tired of the same old superheroes.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay. Who's pick?
So, John, you're next.
There were 2 obvious things to choose with Amazon, and I had to think to myself, which one of these might be a one-timer and which one of these might have many more years for us to be talking about it. And so I chose the one that might be the one-timer. In a way, it's about the boys too, but these are the Kids in the Hall season that Amazon produced that, I talked about it when it came up timeline-wise on this show, but just as a big fan of, I'll talk to Steve's empty chair and Ronald about the Kids in the Hall, but as a big fan of the group when they were new and when they were on HBO and when they moved to CBS, that 5th season, when it ended, I knew they might do more together. I didn't know they would come back and do essentially a 6th season of the show. Like, it wasn't a movie. It wasn't, they've done different projects over the years, but the fact that this was essentially as though they hit pause and then came back this many years later, 30 years later almost, to do a 6th season, looking older, looking paunchier, but maybe playing into the fact that they seem unlikely and out of touch and all of that. So I would say that even though I think that Amazon could probably scrounge up another $50 and let them make a 2nd season of this, I think that in the world of these streaming series, the ones that get the guaranteed 2nd season, the ones that get guaranteed to come back are the ones that are huge hits. So I don't know if we'll be seeing more of this, but I was glad that they got a chance to do it. And a couple 3 sketches from the season were among my favorite sketches that they've ever done. So yeah,
Yeah.
Kids in the Hall, the 6th season, the reboot, whatever you want to call it. But there's 8 episodes on Amazon Prime.
Cool. So Deborah Ayorinde, I had first seen in the show Them, and this is not my pick. It's not Them. It's actually, if Dynasty ran full speed in the succession, you would have this show Riches, which is one of the strangest. It is a sleeper, snuck up on me towards the end of the year. It's like all the drama of Dynasty with some of the power dynamic of Succession. A young woman gets a call that her dad passed away, long lost dad, and she inherits a hair care company in London. So she has to fly from New York to London, and the new family that her dad made absolutely hates her and wants to destroy her at every corner. So it's her. It's also Sarah Niles from Ted, who is like Ted's therapist. She has kind of like a sexy edge to her in this show. It's really cool to see these characters, them, seeing the star of them being used in a way that didn't feel like this trauma. She's really cool and beautiful and sexy and has all this power. It's a fun show. And you won't go to sleep feeling terrible about it. You're like, oh, okay, I wonder what's gonna happen next episode. So Riches, that's my pick for Amazon.
I've never seen that. I need to watch that. That sounds interesting.
Yeah, man, it's fun. It's a fun show.
All right, so let's go and moving on down the list. So the next one would be Disney Plus.
Ooh.
So I was almost going to mention Andor, and this is kind of like a side mention real quick, just because I think it's an incredible show. We talked about it a ton last episode. But if I'm being honest with myself, the show that I enjoy watching on Disney Plus most, and most importantly, because I can watch it with my kids and my wife, and it's just the best thing to watch, period, is Bluey. And
Okay.
I've mentioned Bluey before on the podcast and in my personal life with adults all the time because, yes, I have 2 young children, and that's why I watch this show. But like legitimately, like it's just an incredibly well written show about parenting, about children's learning. These 2 sisters and the parents, the way they use their imaginations to learn, and the way the parents use their own imaginations and fun and games and things like that to gently teach their children these lessons. um the episodes are only like 7 or 8 minutes long. They're very short. And the back half of the 3rd season hit Disney Plus in the summer and had its moment, like where everybody was talking about Bluey. And I was happy to see Bluey finally make her own appearance. And then Macy's Thanksgiving Day Parade this year, she's finally stateside. I can't say enough things about Bluey. Like, it's the best kid show like I've ever seen. Even remembering my brother watching stuff with my younger brother, watching stuff with my younger cousins. The shows that we can kind of all point to as being like, those shows that we grew up on. I think this is one of the ones that I feel very, very fortunate and very thankful that like my daughter and my son, who love the show, that they have access to a show like this. It's just so heartwarming, so sweet, so innocent, and just like so positive and just fun. And it's just an incredible series. So, whether you have children or not, I think, this kind of show can really have an impact on anybody. And just to feel good about life. It's such a positive show. And they said such a good job in like in kind of tackling some challenging subjects that like, young kids can unfortunately come across in their lives. And the show, I honestly, I've never seen any of it handled as well as Bluey handles it. And this isn't like a straight up and down Disney show officially kind of thing. Like they have the distribution for it here in the States, but the argument can be made for a lot of the Netflix stuff too, that are other things that Netflix just buys. But this is one, like, where somebody says, why do you have Disney Plus still? There's a couple shows that I love on Disney Plus, but this is the one that we watch this show, not exaggerating, daily for multiple episodes, just because they're so easy to ingest and just such a joy to watch. And yeah, oh man, just I love Bluey. So yeah, Bluey's my pick for Disney Plus. More Bluey. John, what you got?
I was so sure that Andor was the obvious answer here that I was like, well, if I'm not going first, I have to have something to say. But since I don't have to say that now, I'll just say Andor. And we talked about Andor like a whole half an episode last week. So just refer to last week if you want to hear my my thoughts on Andor. But just in general, I think that it was really smart and really turned out to be a really satisfying, complete statement. And that, I rewatched it with my wife, and it held up. Like, it, rather than feeling like when you've got a slow burn, that second viewing is always a test. It's like, well, was the slow burn, is it just boring if I'm not wondering what's going to happen?
Right.
And the truth is, no, it was actually cooler in some ways because I was catching all the lines of dialogue that set up notions of some of those big moments that we have, big philosophical moments. The little threads of those philosophical debates are threaded throughout the season. So it actually, second time through, was even better. So yeah, Andor.
Cool.
Nice.
What a boring answer.
Yeah.
It's not boring at all when it's like the best Star Wars thing of recent memory.
I just mean coming out of left field with Bluey. I was sitting here wishing I had. I wish
I was betting on everyone thinking I was picking Andor, especially going first. But if I'm being honest,
no, I figured there was
I
the
could
chance
not live
there was
without on Disney Plus.
Yeah.
Well, I remember
really
when
cool.
Henry was that age, how important those things were, Steve, because I felt that way about. He was little when Yo Gabba Gabba was going full force, and I was like, man, I'm so glad he's got a show where they're turning, like, eating your vegetables and being kind to your friend. They have a song called "Don't Bite Your Friend" or whatever, like, it was so fun. But also Adventure Time, Gumball,
I love Adventure Time.
Steven Universe. There were all these great narrative shows with like epic sensibilities about storytelling and humor and art that I was like, I'm so glad that Henry, he doesn't even know that he's growing up in this golden age of like really creative, funny cartoons.
Yeah.
It's amazing.
Have you watched Bee and Puppy Cat?
I've seen a little bit of it, but I have not watched it.
No.
It's up there with Adventure Time.
But what we're talking about is a funny phenomenon where you become an expert on those shows for a few years. And then one day you're sitting there and someone mentions Bluey and you're like, I know about Bluey, but I didn't know it was that good, And it's like, then you realize I don't ever need to sit down. Like, me and Bluey might not ever have that much of a meet unless I decide I'm going to just watch some Bluey here at home.
I think you should, John. Okay. It's just a positive experience.
I need a little pick me up sometimes, so I might dip into Bluey.
It's there on Disney Plus.
Cool.
Ronald, what's your pick?
If Andor was the best Star Wars show, this one to me was like the best show, like by miles. It wasn't even close between Andor and this show. It fucked me up because every depiction of her that I saw in comic books and video games, I hated. And then I see this amazing Muslim American superhero that kind of rocked my world, man. Miss Marvel is special in a way that I just wasn't expecting. In a sea of like really disappointing times in terms of the Marvel stuff, and it just feels like it was on this downshift, and then out of the blue, this cool ass character comes and kind of shakes up my world. I love how light it was, and when it got heavy, it was pretty heavy. They touched on some really cool stuff in ways that didn't feel heavy-handed, and you could tell that some people that had experience with feeling like the other did this show. It's just a special show. And the more I thought about it, Andor was in my head, but the more I thought about it, Miss Marvel was in my head like the whole year, almost nonstop. So that's my pick.
Yeah, it's a great pick. I mean, definitely one of the better Marvel series.
I thought you were about to talk about Werewolf by Night and how important it was that we finally got werewolf representation.
Yeah, I should have, man.
That too was very good.
No, I know. That would have been my pick.
Let's see here. So HBO Max.
Okay.
There's so many opportunities to pick stuff for this show, for this platform, but I'm gonna be basic as hell and just say House of the Dragon. And I'm only gonna say it mainly because I feel like while I love this first season, obviously I'm super excited for what comes next. I'm mainly picking it because of how successful the network was in kind of leveraging and spinning off and just continuing what they could do with the biggest show of all time, you know, and however you feel about how Game of Thrones ended, the time between it and House of Dragons start, you know, there's been a big appetite for more of that world. And I think that the way they managed and handled the first season and you know, casting, and we talked about it, like the time jumps and like concern about that and it really not being a concern. The performances in the first season, you know, we talked about Patty Considine specifically, just amazing work. Not to mention just that vibe of like Sunday night, I got another Game of Thrones or House of the Dragon episode that I get to sit down with my wife and like we just wait for it every week to watch. And you know, other shows on HBO Max do that same thing, and they're amazing shows. And hopefully, you guys pick two of them, two other ones. But I just think they're what Game of Thrones meant to me.
I picked a really shitty one.
Yeah, hopefully. Yeah. Way to let me down, John.
Yeah. Sorry.
You know, but like, you know, what Game of Thrones meant to me as a series and is one of my favorite shows ever. A lot of hesitation, a lot of concern, like what, you know, how is it going to work? And I think it worked, just period.
Yeah.
And worked wildly successful. Like just viewership is crazy. And it's just like, you know, especially even succeeding, you know, going up against on a separate platform at the same time, the Rings of Power on Amazon Prime, which is kind of not the same audience, but it's two big IP shows. And for House of the Dragon to perform the way it did, both commercially in terms of viewership and just like narratively. I mean, there's some all-time scenes in the first season of House of the Dragon. If you want to talk about Game of Thrones world, like there's all-time scenes in that first season. They accomplished that.
Yeah.
And that's crazy to think about.
What's the first scene you think of when you say that? All-time scenes. There's the one that jumped to the front of the line for me.
I don't know. I mean, two are in my mind. Either
to me, the kid getting knocked out of the sky. I mean,
that's dragon.
That last scene of the season, essentially, not the very last scene, but the last big moment of the season. That's a big one. But there's one that was more of a not quite as dynamic of a moment. That was upsetting, though, Ronald. Like
something like
was seeing the pieces of the little dragon. Like it wasn't just a kid. It was a kid dragon, and watching the pieces of it as it fell, the wing was still flapping. Like on just a chunk of flesh as it was falling. But it's Viserys walking into the courtroom, his long walk up that goes from being bizarre to being uncomfortable
at the moment,
to being kind of funny to being very powerful to being very sad. I mean, somehow it goes on long enough for you to go through this gamut of feelings. And again, I feel like he was the MVP for me of the season in a lot of ways. Yeah, what a great show. What a great world. What a great like continuation and I'm glad that they know what they're doing as far as story wise, like that they know now what they've got set out for them. And they've said it's going to be so many years. They're not making a show about a story that hasn't been finished yet, which was a bit of an issue before. So, you know, this was an interesting one. HBO Max. I was a little confused. Like, what's an HBO Max show? Is it an HBO show? If it's on Cinemax, does it count? So I basically used the standard of if it was on my HBO Max app, I would count it, you know? So I didn't know what the standard was outside of that.
But that's a good rule of thumb.
There were like 4 shows that were kind of tied. 4, actually like 6 shows that I think I liked about the same. So I was like, well, okay, I'm just gonna pick which one.
This is the ultimate Walker.
No, but it's not because I'm not going to say what they are. But like I thought like, what show was that appointment? What show was that week to week? Gosh, there's one show that I really want to say, but I'm going to just be my version of basic and say Peacemaker was
good.
I mean, it hit those marks. It was not quite like, I think Andor gives us the first out of the Marvel, out of the DC, out of the Star Wars. That's the first show that feels like it's competing with the quality of television that we're dealing with nowadays. Peacemaker was this close. It didn't feel like prestige television, but it did feel like a movie, the movie world being extended perfectly into the TV realm, almost to the point where the footage would match up. Although when they did show one clip from one of the movies as a flashback, it looked so much better. You realize that movies still look better than television. I'm not sure why. That's a conversation for another day. But no, it just had the James Gunn humor. It had characters that stuck out for me. What I'm remembering is your Bluey experience. My family's Bluey was Peacemaker. It was like the whole family was equally invested in it. Like, you know, the Marvel shows, the Star Wars stuff, Henry kind of comes in and out of how interested he is. Sometimes he doesn't want to watch it when it's brand new. He'll watch it later, you know? And that's unheard of but the truth is, Peacemaker, we were all always ready to go. Like when that was ready to watch, the whole family would make time for it. And it's funny, gross, action-packed, violent, all the stuff you want from James Gunn. But it also had that weird thing that you get with a television show, which is a cast of characters, an ad hoc family that by the time it gets to the end of a season, you care about these idiotic constructs. And I think, James Gunn knows how to do that. So yeah. And also now this feels like this is the tipping point of him becoming the DC guy. Yeah. So if this is an indication of what he's going to do in little pockets of that world, it's hopeful. But I'm not judging it based on how it fits into a franchise. I'm just saying it was a really good, funny show. And talk about something that had like meme power. That opening sequence was something that gained traction in the culture. People were excerpting it. People were imitating it. People were talking about it. The fact that people were talking about, oh, it's the one I don't hit skip intro on. That means something in 2022. So
cool. Oh, my pick. So I was a big, when I wasn't a Disney guy, when I got a little older, I became a huge HBO guy. So I was like big into like Josephine Baker's story and Mandela. And there was a show that kind of brought it back to that feeling of like those, kind of what Hulu's doing, that kind of filthy feeling where you're like, man, this person really did that back in the day. And that's Winning Time, the rise of the Lakers dynasty. There's
the show that broke up Adam McKay and Will Ferrell.
Yeah, unfortunately, man. Hopefully they become friends again at some point. But yeah, this felt like the feeling that I felt the 90s when like a HBO Pictures biopic would come on. Mm-hmm. And it was like, except I'd say the casting was much better in this one. It was just fun and I learned a lot. And I actually read the book, Winning Time. A chunk of it, and it was almost like page for page these like accounts of the Lakers and stuff like that. So everything that I read I was seeing on screen. That's not very common. It's not very common to see a direct translation like that. So
yeah
this was like, to me, one of the better things that I'd seen this year. So Winning Time.
And they're coming back for a second season too, right?
Get
the fuck out of here.
Get out of here.
Get out of here.
Get the grease out your ass, man.
Whatever that means.
Asterisk, we're still looking that up.
Speaking of, just to go back to Truck Turner, Ronald, you said improv might be happening there. You know what I think is evidence of improv with amateurish actors is every line starts with man and ends with man.
Yes. That is.
Come on, man. Man, what you doing, man?
That's the comedian's version of, man, that's crazy.
Yeah.
It's like what comedians do, there's like a low-tech transitional phrase. Yeah, so.
Wild stuff.
Speaking of wild stuff, we got this last category, the everything else category. This is just this was the hardest one. I mean,
this is honestly, all the stupid, shitty streaming services that aren't as important as the ones we just
the dumbasses who can't get their shit together and get more than 50 million subscribers. But yeah, so anything is really represented in here. We're talking things like Hulu, Apple TV Plus, Peacock, Paramount Plus, Roku channel, anything that's out there, you know what I mean? And some of the things that we just, these networks I just mentioned, really, if you're going to make a list of your favorite shows of the year, a lot of my picks would be from these services, to be honest. But for my pick, and again, part of this is banking on maybe what you guys may choose. But
I'm banking on you, Steve. Don't bank on me.
No, I'm going wild card here. I'm going with a service that I didn't even mention.
Oh, you motherfucker.
Although, you know what? Let me think a second. So, John, you made the comment about HBO and HBO Max. So, if it's in the app, it qualifies.
That's my impression. I think so. Because you could watch it purely on the app.
Do you agree with that, Ronald?
Here's let me make the case for why I feel that way, Ronald, before. If you only go through if you've cut the cord and you only go through the app, then that show is on that app.
Just that app.
Now you could debate what streaming service, like for instance,
It was
Andor
produced for it, right?
is on Hulu as like a thing they're doing through that. But I still think of Andor as a Disney Plus show. That one doesn't count as a Hulu show. But I think if you go to Hulu and it's got like I don't know what's an FX show that's on Hulu and what's a Hulu. I mean, I don't know the difference between that often. Right. That's where I am. But yet, we can always fight each other. If one of us mentions a pick that we think is invalid, we can break up. This can be the end of movie Schmovie.
See, it's kind of a weird pick. Like I keep going back and forth because it ended in 2022, started in 2021. So does that qualify or no?
I think it qualifies. What
do you think, John?
I think it qualifies only because I was not sure that I'm not sure that you can always find an accurate list of that anyway, unless you go in and look at the actual dates of premiering of stuff, So I think that's fair.
The back half of the season ended in January. So like it was very early, but I'm going to just give it love because I don't want people to forget about this show. They just announced today that the second season's coming out in March, but it's Showtime's Yellow Jackets. And I feel like we talked a lot about this show at the early part of the year. Again, people kind of came to it even later than it aired because it kind of was one of those shows that caught on. And, I think just because of the idea of the casting is just so amazing in the show. You have because it's built around these two separate timelines of like the 90s and today or present day. And these high schoolers that were on this trip, I think it was a soccer team that, has a plane crash and they crash onto this island or into this forest, and kind of strange stuff happens. It's very, at least what it's shown so far, maybe some Lost type of stuff kind of going on, and then maybe some other not so Losty kind of stuff going on, like just some bad people maybe. But yeah, I just feel like the casting, having actresses like Melanie Linsky, Christina Ricci, Juliette Lewis play the adult versions of the main characters of the teens from the 90s. It's just genius. And also just the soundtrack to the show is nothing but 90s alternative bangers. Like just the playlist on Spotify has been something that I've listened to all year. Like the official one is it's incredible. And,
What's
the
banger?
show,
is that like a jam?
A banger? Yeah, it's a jam.
Or a bop? Is it kind of adjacent to a bop?
It's just like a bop. Yeah, it's a bop.
But
yeah,
it's a little harder than a bop, right? Like
it's a little harder. Yeah, it's got that edge to it, much like the 90s alternative music did.
If we were to pluralize that, would we put a Z on there?
Bangers. We could do that. I mean, just because of who we are, we could do that right now.
Thank you, Steve.
Yeah. But yeah, it's got that mix of like horror, mystery, thriller. And another show that I almost chose for this pick has the same thing, but the X factor for this was the 90s of it all. The 90s actresses playing the present day versions of these teens, and the performances are just amazing. I mean, the show is incredible. And, the way the show ended the first season, very much like the other show I almost picked, great cliffhanger. And I just think that, for all the shows that exist that we talked about this season or this year, there's really only two shows that like really left me on that crazy kind of cliffhanger feeling. And I got to go with my 90s love, and I got to give the edge to Yellow Jackets. And honestly, an all-female cast. It's just, and everybody's kicking ass the entire season. And again, you got Christina Ricci, Juliette Lewis, and Melanie Linsky. Especially, Melanie Linsky is like low-key one of the best around doing it still. And I think, having them all together as the leads is just like a gift. So yeah, Yellow Jackets is on Showtime. Again, they just announced today, actually, that the second season comes out in March of 2023. So I'm looking forward to that. John, you're next. Tell me the other one that I almost picked.
Oh, see, what if I don't, though? What if I were to say right now, I'm not going to fall into your trap, Steve?
Oh, my God, John. Then Ronald might pick it.
But there's a chance. There's a chance that then when this podcast is over, I will snap into a different identity that doesn't remember anything that happened on this podcast.
And then you'd be like, what happened?
Life before we recorded this podcast.
You'd never know otherwise.
None the wiser and perfectly happy, because frankly, that version of me is so happy he doesn't have to deal with the fucking bullshit of being on the podcast with you fuck-ass sons of bitches. Of course, Severance is the show. You were talking about the cliffhanger, the ending. That ending was one of the most. I mean, I almost wanted to give it to a sideways choice because there are things we haven't talked about as much. And obviously, Severance is getting a lot of ink. People are definitely, they know about this show.
Yeah.
But I mean, I think just for me, you talk about Lost, you talk about these different things. There's all these different feelings that a show can give you, and Severance is a weird, tonally specific show that takes several episodes. If you really were to just cut out the footage of people walking down hallways together, you might have like half the length of the season. I mean, it's a very weirdly paced show, but it draws you in, and it's like it reminds me of something David Lynchy or like The Prisoner or something like that, where the weirdness and the odd pace and herky-jerky feeling is part of it. It's part of the concept. I think these are actors that we like to see. I think Adam Scott is someone who we're happy got not just a vehicle, but this kind of oddball vehicle. John Turturro is, every time he pops up in a role that he gets to really show what he can do these days, he's amazing. The cat people they've added for season 2, I don't know if you've seen this. Aaliyah Shawkat, Gwendolyn Christie, Bob Balaban. It's that show. John Noble from Fringe. It's that show where it's like it's going into the second season and it's adding people that sound like, ooh, it's like Fargo, where the people, they announce who's going to be on it, and now you go, oh, I wonder what that's going to be like in this world. What can Aaliyah Shawkat, what can she add to this world? What can Bob Balaban bring to this world? I'm assuming Ben Stiller is still heavily involved on the directorial side of it. So I mean, I think it's just a season 2. I'm really excited to see what they're going to do, and a lot of it has to do with, as you said, Steve, the way they left us. That last half an episode, but really like the last 10 minutes were some of the most like carefully made, like, if you want to say the season moved a little slow, but it built up to that, I think even then it's still worth it. But I would say that even when it was being slow, it was giving you information and getting you into this weird world. But the hook of where this can go, the potential of it, the difference between your work self and your home self, and the need to keep those separate. I mean, there's so much going on there metaphorically and just within the narrative, the fantasy sci-fi aspect of it, that are interesting things to chew on. So yeah, Severance it was the obvious one. It was when you said you weren't going to go obvious, it was the one I knew you weren't picking. So damn it, Steve, you controlled me.
It worked.
Yeah, I've been like a puppet.
All right, Ronald, round it out, baby.
And this shouldn't be a surprise for you guys. I've championed this show forever.
Oh, forever. You mean since it came out?
Since it came out. A random fighter, the son of a failed boxer, goes into an alley and recognizes a man that committed a crime. And he jumps into a world of crime from that point on that is relentless. Gangs of London season 2. More guns, more action, more twists, more turns. They sacrifice people you didn't think would get sacrificed. This is fucking crazy how they upped the ante from season 1 to season 2. Gangs of London, AMC Plus's Gangs of London 2. They just announced 3 will come.
The moment when we were making the categories and you said AMC Plus, I'm like, all right, he's got that one covered.
Yeah.
Because that's like kind of like it's a more of a niche one, and it's like, what's the one on there? Oh yeah, definitely Gangs of London.
Yeah, it's such a strangely good show. Like every episode feels like a movie. I know it's like a hard thing to really imagine because sure, TV shows do feel like movies, but cinematically, action-wise, Sope Dirisu, who plays Elliot Finch, he's like this guy that we can all put ourselves in. Like he gets in these jams that are so crazy, and he gets more vicious as the season goes by. There's a robbery that they do in this show that I've been thinking about ever since I saw it. It's basically you let your car float a little bit up to tap a person's car. That person comes out of the car, and then you come from the opposite side. It got done like 3 times in this show, and I was like, this is genius. I've never seen it before, and it happened 3 times in the show, or 2 times in the show. So it's just one of those shows, man. Action packed. People die, get shot to mush. Throats get ripped out.
Yeah, it's like I don't want to say this comparison like just because it's way more than this movie series, but like if you're a fan of something like John Wick,
you
know,
sure.
like or even more appropriately and directly connected, like The Raid, those kinds of that vibe of the action at least, and like how visceral it gets. And then you mix that with like the crime saga
Yes.
element of like the family crime saga.
Yeah.
And it's just a perfect marriage. And like the way they I haven't finished season 2 yet, so I gotta
Okay.
hold back on it. But I just think that, yeah, I mean, you and I were going nuts over season 1, and to think that it's season 2's here and season 3's already been announced. And it's exciting to see more people talking about the series,
Yes.
especially because it's immediately available on AMC Plus and things like that this time around. But yeah, that's a great pick, and yeah, that's something that people can find. I don't think enough people have seen that show, and they need to, because if anything that we mentioned, like John Wick or The Raid or those kinds of action movies, the choreography element of them, that's all over this show. Like every episode has some big fucking fight or something, some shootout, something that's on that scope. That's what Ronald's talking about when he said it's like cinematic. Like it's got that attention and it's got that thought. But yeah, it's an incredible show.
So I just want to throw this out there.
Yeah.
We're not going to get bogged down doing a bunch of also rans, but does anybody have a show that like you're shocked didn't come up? Steve.
The Bear.
Oh,
I forgot about The Bear.
I had 2 picks I thought Ronald was going to pick for this category, and it was Gangs of London or The Bear.
Okay.
And that's why I didn't pick The Bear. I kind of was playing the odds. It fell through, but yeah, The Bear is one of my favorite shows of the year on Hulu. Just a great, flawless series.
Ronald, was there anything that you can't believe didn't come up?
I forgot that The Bear came out in 2022. I mean, like that show's perfection, man.
Yeah.
That's about it. Yeah. Couldn't really think of anything else.
I really wanted to mention Our Flag Means Death, but
yeah.
Oh yes,
that's a good one too. Honestly, HBO Max is like, just to kind of wrap up with this conversation, like HBO Max is, even when we're going on the list, is just such a wealth of great shows. Like, and that's kind of that HBO reputation. And they've managed to kind of pivot into the streaming space with that, in terms of like the shows that they're making still, and new shows that they're starting to make. Shows like like Our Flag Means Death and Hacks and Succession, White Lotus. Like they just got all these great prestige shows that are Station
Minx.
11 even was last year. Minx.
Although Minx is a Cinemax show, but it's essentially, isn't it? Or is it an HBO Max?
I think it's an HBO show. Yeah.
Okay.
I'm pretty sure.
What I love is that we've just mentioned, I said there were 6 that were tied for me for HBO Max.
Right.
I didn't have to walk or anything, and we just got we just named them all.
So you paid it back, and you got me to say it for you.
Yes. We got Steved.
Yeah, there it was. When I think I still got Walker. It's just like the next level of it. It's like your Jedi powers have just ascended.
I can incept you.
But yeah, just like HBO Max is like,
who's the puppet now?
I feel like HBO Max is just such a,
the excellence is there
on another level in terms of just the quality across the board. And even you mentioning Severance, I think we talked a few times, like Apple TV Plus also has a level of like quality that I think is definitely setting them apart, even if they're not like the most popular service out there. Like a lot of their series are very good. And I think that's something that some of the other platforms would love to have, like that kind of a library that they've created from nothing, because they don't have the vault, they don't have the library titles. Like they're creating this library as they go. So that's an interesting piece of theirs. I also was gonna for on Netflix, one of the ones, it's a every year, it's like one of my favorite shows is Never Have I Ever. Just again, like that rom-com coming of age high school thing. I'm sucker for it, and it's just they do it better every season. And that show is definitely one of my favorites as well. I don't think if there's anything else that you mentioned Gangs of London. There's a lot of shows that, honestly, I mentioned it earlier with Falling Behind on the Boys, I just haven't watched yet, that I've heard are great. Like I've heard a lot of good things recently about The Peripheral on Amazon Prime, which is the people that do like Westworld. I gotta catch that. It's supposed to be.
I want
to
see the English. I want to.
Yeah, the English is supposed to, that's HBO Max.
It's
Amazon.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's 2 on Amazon. Like I didn't watch The Terminal List, which I don't know that I would love that show, but I heard a lot of good things about it. But I mean, that's Amazon's problem, I think, is like, or maybe most of these streaming services just like awareness of what and when is available.
Yeah.
It's just a weird challenge. And we come across a lot of stuff by just sharing in conversation, but like other stuff like just completely just falls to the side. But
Yeah.
let me ask you guys this, just as a kind of just to sum it up and just to close this one out. If you had to only keep one streaming service, which one would you keep? John, you can go first.
I'm picturing this. I guess my answer is based on something kind of tricky, because it's not really based on the series, but it's based on how often I just watch movies on Amazon Prime. But I use even if I'm renting a movie for $3.99 or whatever, I'm using that streaming app, that streaming service the most. I would actually say, gosh, it's tough to say though, as far as like the actual offerings of the service. I think I go to Netflix a lot as though I'm going to find something I want to watch there, but I don't always find something new that I want to watch there. And I'll end up going to some sitcom or something that I've seen before. I don't know. So it's tough to know, but I guess I would say Amazon Prime is the one that I end up watching the most, because I am watching a lot of movies and I do like some of the programming they have. But I honestly, Rings of Power and Kids in the Hall were the only, and The Boys were the only Amazon Prime shows that I watched religiously this year. So
Ronald,
it's not an exciting answer.
HBO Max.
It's the one. It's got the most good material, right? Like original.
It's the most diverse. It has anime. It has it's crazy. Like, and now they're starting to like put, like you were saying, stuff from like Showtime, and it's weird the way that HBO Max is set up now. So I'm seeing more things than I would have before.
And to make it even more confusing, this week there's rumors that the whole rebranding of HBO Max and Discovery Plus, the app is going to be called Max.
Good
wild,
God, man.
Just
wild.
Max. Yeah, like that's what they came up with.
What is wrong with them?
I don't know. That's just more silliness, I think. But
yeah,
to make it even more odd and confusing, I guess. But yeah, I mean, I made the comment before. I just feel like across the board, HBO Max has like the most like quality of stuff.
Yeah.
But I kind of feel like, Netflix is still the one I would have to have. I just think that, there's more than enough on there that I enjoy watching. And I think also just for like the family element of it, like the kids stuff and even stuff that Aaron loves, like some of the more pulpy kind of shows that they have that I don't personally watch, but like she loves. And I just feel like as a well-rounded product for the price point, I still think it's the leader, and I think it's something that they're challenged for constantly. But I do think they've had such a head start in certain areas that it'll be interesting to see like how they leverage the ad tiers and like whatever they're going to eventually try to do with like stopping people sharing things and things like that, like passwords, and how that affects the platform. But I think dollars, across, just for my dollar, I think that I still find myself going to Netflix the most. And not to mention, I love a lot of the shows on Netflix. Like I love Dahmer. I love, what was I started watching Wednesday. I think that's a lot of fun. That's like, this show is like massively huge this year already.
Mm-hmm.
They just have so much coming out that like, I just find myself always at least interested in checking something out. And
well, that's what I mean about always going to it kind of first and flipping around, because even if I end up like watching
you're trained to it almost
that I'm not that excited about, I'll be like, something in that top 10, that trending, that new is going to be interesting. Sure. And they have such a constant flow of new stuff. Whereas with HBO Max, I find that the shows I love there's more shows I love there, but the shows I watch religiously, when they come out, I watch it. And then I'm not going back to HBO Max, except when I'm expecting
that's
one of those shows.
That's a good point. Like you're
Netflix, I'm jumping on, and I actually browse Hulu a lot too. Hulu has a lot of, but I mean, I watch true crime shit still kind of as comfort food. So I spend a lot of time going to, Discovery Plus and Peacock both have like Dateline or whatever kind of true crime shows. That's like, so if you're going to put something like that on and almost leave it on like background, then that's happening. But I wouldn't. If I had to really choose what shows were part of my diet, I don't know that I would consider that stuff that
the
important.
Other thing that's like weird about HBO Max that I'm curious to see how it looks going forward is that, and it really hasn't been a big impact so far because it's more about their shows, but like the way they're going to change, the kid, the family and child, like kid programming on the platform, and like not make as many movies for the platform. Like I'd be curious to see how that affects the platform as like a go-to uh exercise, outside of being like, oh, the Batman was in theaters for 2 or for a month and a half, and now it's on HBO Max, so I'll go watch it there. Where like when things break, I feel like, and have that moment, they're having the moment, whether it's theatrical or if it's a streaming TV series, like when it first hits, and I feel like it still feels like Netflix is that platform for it, for me at least still. But I don't know. I'd be curious to see how they all kind of change or, flex a little bit in the coming year, because I think they all need to change. And said it before, but we'll say it again. Like some of these everything else ones, they're gonna go away. They're gonna go away. They're gonna be absorbed, bought, changed, consolidated, whatever. But it'll be curious to see how that happens.
Yeah, sure.
So that's cool, man. That's a good conversation. I appreciate you guys, going through and picking those favorites of this year for the platforms. Was there anything else that you watched in the last week that you wanted to mention before we wrap up the episode on any of those platforms or movie theaters or anything like that?
Okay, Ronald, let's hear what you have.
Perfect. Let's go.
Do it.
The Norwegian film Troll, the
on
Netflix movie.
Netflix,
on Netflix, man. So there is one cool thing about Netflix that they kind of bring to the table, and that's like 4K good sounding movies. And if you have a solid sound bar, this thing thumps, man. It thumps in a way that I just hadn't really seen, a lot of movies like this. It's a cool story. I kind of told you guys it feels like Skull Island, like the Skull Island version of Troll Hunter. It's not even related. These two movies aren't related, but you could tell it was definitely inspired by Troll Hunter, which came out like 2007 or something like that. But great movie to watch, really fun, really quick. And when the troll shows up, he's on screen for the rest of the movie. So it's not like it's not hidden. He's just like, oh, I'm here. He's not as big as you might think.
It's a weird line of dialogue to have.
I'm here.
I'm here.
So,
no, you're not. That's the other guy.
But yeah, Troll's a fun one, man.
Well, I mean, here's the thing. We were talking about all the offerings on Netflix, and like one thing that's interesting about Netflix is like Henry Selick and Jordan Peele collaborated on a movie that no one's even talking about that is on the service, Wendell and Wild. So stop motion animation junkies can pop on to the service the day this episode comes out and see that, or they can watch Guillermo del Toro's Pinocchio, which I saw in the theater yesterday. I had a chance to be down in Annapolis, where the art house theater there just has better selections than the one here in Baltimore. It gets stuff sooner. And I
like that theater a lot.
I'm going to watch. I had to choose between this or The Fabelmans, but I figured The Fabelmans isn't more theaters. It's actually kind of in semi-wide release right now, so I can catch that more easily. So I watched Pinocchio, which I thought, well, I could see it on Netflix on Friday, but seeing it on the big screen, this is a movie that is gorgeous, and the gorgeousness of it is going to be a lot of the selling point for the casual viewer, I think. You might have a lot of thoughts about whether you've seen Pinocchio before, or whether you are interested in that story. For me, this movie continues the trend of Guillermo del Toro being like my favorite filmmaker who I don't always love his movies, and I don't always love his full aesthetic. I think there are moments when he has made something that I think is near perfect. Like I thought Nightmare Alley was fantastic. And I mean, I've loved his movies, but more so I love him. I love his aesthetic. I love what he's able to do. Like that Cabinet of Curiosities on Netflix is a similar thing. It's like, it's got that Guillermo del Toro vibe to it, even when it's not clicking. It's like there's a level paid to production design and like old world, like costumes and the lighting and the sets and everything. The makeup is artistic. And so you would expect his stop motion animation foray, which was co-directed by, I'm going to make sure I'm getting the guy's name right. Is it Mark Gustafson? Well, I don't see the name on here, but anyway, I believe it's the guy who co-directed all of the like what was the
Yeah, Mark Gustafson.
And he also, I think it was one of the Wes Anderson movies that he co-directed. Maybe it was The Fantastic Mr. Fox. But anyway, so this is an amazingly accomplished visual film. There's a couple of character designs that are in that uncanny valley of being like so unappealing that they're kind of awful to look at. Like sometimes there's certain puppets that make me feel funny because they're so ugly and weird looking, but they look kind of real. But outside of some moments of, and a couple of major characters that are sort of just in my mind like overdone, unattractive designs, it's got that kind of quirky look and feel, almost like of a Henry Selick or a Leica production. But I don't know. It's an interesting movie. It's Guillermo del Toro. He said it's kind of part of his trilogy of films of people kind of fighting fascism and political turmoil, like so that it fits in with Devil's Backbone and Pan's Labyrinth. And I think if you see the movie, you'll see how it can live up to that claim, that it actually does deal with the backdrop of war and, you know, real events. But the problem with the movie, and I saw someone say it's too kiddie for adults and it's too adult for kids. I don't quite agree with that. Like, I think a kid who's into weird, dark, creepy imagery would find this movie really arresting. I think there's so much to recommend it. It's so fun, but the problem is it just hits the brakes whenever they try to do like the kiddie humor or like a song. There's like 5 or 6 musical moments in this that just do not work at all. Like, I thought the music was like downright bad, if not just kind of a non-starter. So I feel like if the movie didn't try to kind of feign towards being a musical, and if it didn't have some ill-advised attempts to be funny, I just don't know if Guillermo del Toro is a particularly hilarious guy. So I don't know if that's the problem. But I think outside of that, the very things you might think would be hypnotic and beautiful about this movie, it is something to look at. And in the end, I think it does do some really cool, interesting things with the way it wraps up and the way it kind of updates the idea of Pinocchio, which is like Pinocchio's desire to be a real boy can be seen in modern eyes as like, well, shouldn't you want to be yourself? What's this thing he wants to be that he's not? This movie finds an interesting way of keeping the original idea and building it towards a moral or a lesson, if you will, that feels more contemporary. But no, great voice cast, some really cool things about it. Absolutely gorgeous in spots. And very visceral, nicely textured. But yeah, you're going to wish to God it didn't have any of these songs in it.
I wanted to mention, I'll round out the Netflix hat trick here, and I'll just say that I finally caught up with Jonah Hill's documentary Stutz.
I've been wanting to see that. How is it?
No question, the best documentary I've seen all year. And it's maybe one of my favorite movies I've seen all year. It's just like I've never experienced like a therapy session or stuff like that. But it's imagine like, you know, the Phil Stutz, his therapist, who the documentary is about, and it's basically like them, you know, this journey they've taken together when Jonah started using him years ago just for help and with anxiety attacks and things like that. But the you know, the way that the documentary is kind of laid out in these just conversational pieces that discuss this gentleman's approach to therapy, which he calls the tools, it just seems like this movie feels a bit like a therapy session of what I imagine one could feel like if you were in the hands of someone as gifted as this gentleman seems to be. It's just a really sweet documentary. It gets really personal on both sides of the conversation. And, you know, as someone, I really like Jonah Hill, and I really kind of appreciate and respect like some of the public issues that he's had. And, you know, he's been pretty open about some of this stuff. And I'm sure some of that started when he started working with this therapist. But yeah, I recommend if you have like, you know, an hour and a half or so to watch this documentary. I mean, I just feel like I found myself kind of pausing at times to like think about the concepts that he's putting forward in his approach to dealing with mental health and things of that nature. And these ideas that he presents, and, you know, that are all part of these tools that I just found it really kind of like, it kind of knocked me out a little bit. Because I mean, I'm not gonna lie, like I'm in a position where I've been very stressed, very anxious in life, you know, and I feel like this movie kind of like, that's why I felt like myself kind of taking in some of the stuff he was saying. I was very receptive to the conversation and to these ideas that he presents to his patients. And just as a person, it just seems like just an amazing person. And somebody that I'm sure Jonah Hill is very fortunate to have found, you know, to help him with his life. But I think he's a very well-known therapist and has helped tons of like big name creatives and celebrities and things like that. But just a gem of a man. I mean, at least for what I can see in this documentary. But yeah, it's called Stutz. It's only like an hour, 30 hour, 40 minutes. It's on, again, Netflix. directed by Jonah Hill, and it's really just the two of them. Jonah's mom is in it briefly, is a part of one of the sessions. But I can't recommend it enough. It was outstanding. I loved it.
Wow.
Yeah, so it's called Stutz.
I just realized that all the way to the bowl might refer to all the way to like a bowl game, like an athletic, like a Super Bowl.
Okay.
Or I was thinking it meant to the toilet.
I know that, but that's after saying you're gonna deep walk through your girlfriend all the way to the toilet.
All the way to the bowl.
Pretty nasty.
I mean, you
but
could
all the way
something
to
out.
like a bowl game makes a little bit more sense. Anyway,
All the way to the
Well,
bowl.
he was a football player in the movie.
That's
right?
what I'm saying. Yeah.
Yeah. So there you go. So there's that's logical.
All the way to the bowl. That
Look
makes
at
a lot
you.
more sense.
Coming out of a nice therapy documentary to connecting it to the post-coitus, going to the bowl.
Oh, by the way, I meant to mention, I'm so glad you said the word coitus. We've got a new coitus animal, coitus cat. Did you not notice he was sitting there watching him? You know, if longtime listeners might remember that in Creed, we talked about Coitus Turtle, who's the turtle who watches Creed have sex with his girlfriend on the couch at Rocky's place. And Coitus Turtle has lived on in people's minds and hearts since that day.
Yeah.
He continues to.
But I think today we can say Coitus Cat has joined the group because that cat was definitely just watching it.
Yeah.
And that cat didn't have long to live either. So that cat, that was one of the most beautiful things that cat saw, like in the later days of its life, was two people making love.
For sure. Before he was brutally slain.
Oh,
The beautiful art of love making with McDonald's wrappers and like empty bottles all around. It's
as it is. Yeah, it's like
as it is.
And yeah, as it is. All right, cool. Moviesmovie.com is the website. You can hit us up there, jump into whatever podcast platform you prefer to use if you want to subscribe. If you're not already subscribed, you may be. Hopefully you are. And if you are, hopefully you've already left a review or a rating if that platform offers it.
Heck,
or
buy another phone and subscribe on that.
Yeah, is that another subscription though? It's probably the same account, right?
If you buy another phone, I think it would go in separately.
Okay. Well, okay, we
you got to have a whole new ID.
We got to get on that, John. Yeah, so that's the website. You can listen right on the site if you prefer, just to kind of watch through the browser or listen through the browser rather. But speaking of watching, youtube.com/movie podcast is the visual option if you want to watch the video that Ronald puts together every week. And
thank you, Ronald,
for
putting
it's just as fun as the podcast, but you get to watch us, make weird gestures with our hands and laugh and walk off camera for 10 seconds, whatever it takes.
You can see all the weird things we do with our hands when we're really excited about a film.
When you're listening, that you can only guess what we're doing, but like now you can confirm or deny those assumptions. But yeah, if you do follow the YouTube, make sure you subscribe, hit the bell to get the notifications when new episodes or new videos come out, because we do put out some shorts during the week just to kind of promote the next week's episode or like maybe next week's required viewing. I'm sure Ronald's going to put together a great short about Avatar, which I can't wait to watch. And by short, I mean Avatar. It's probably going to be like a 5-minute short, right? It's going to go beyond the 60 seconds that YouTube allows. But yeah, follow us on the YouTube option, or if you want to listen, just please subscribe. And again, thank you for listening. As always, you've made our day. Thanks.
Bye.